All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second session of the day for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. My name is Paris. I work here at Google on Kubernetes community strategy. We have an awesome panel for you today. I'm super excited about it. And we've got Jeff, who is behind his avatar there, who is spinning our YouTube ones and twos, if you will. If any aspiring DJs are out there, he is making sure that we are coming through crystal clear. If we're not, yell at Jeff in the chat. You'll know about that in a second. But first things first, why are you here? For people on Twitter who are like, what is this link? What did I just come and stumble upon? This is our efforts to help upstream contributors both onboard and get questions answered and maybe things unblocked and questions that they would usually ask a mentor. Not everybody has time, unfortunately, to do traditional one-on-one mentoring. So this is our efforts to help alleviate some of those pain points and keep people moving and keeping them from being blocked. Of course, we do have a code of conduct. This applies to both our panelists as well as our people in the people on chat and stuff that are asking questions. If you could just be excellent to each other, that would be awesome. Panelists, you are also more than welcome to ask each other questions. You probably don't know each other. I mean, Michelle and Vlad most likely do, of course. But Matt, you may not know these folks, so feel free to ask any questions that you like as well. But we're going to kick things off with some introductions. Michelle, why don't you go first? Give us a quick rundown of who you are and how you've come to us.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, my name is Michelle. I've been contributing to SIG Storage for a little over 2 years now. I primarily work at Google, but I have been mostly focused on working on the storage layer in Kubernetes. Some of the recent projects that I worked on include local volumes, which just went GA in 1.14. And in addition to that, some volume topology work in the scheduler.
Y'all did awesome work for all that local PV stuff to GA. Everyone appreciates you. I feel like Twitter was lit up with thanks. So
yeah, that was very exciting to see. So
yes, thank you very much. And I'm sure we might even have some questions about that later. Vlad, who are you and why are you here?
Hi, my name is Vladimir Vivien. I work for VMware. I've been participating in Kubernetes for, I would say, about 3 years now. I started out way back when you could actually create a volume plugin inside Kubernetes. That was my first assignment and my introduction head first into Kubernetes. And I've been participating since then, helping out the community and my biggest contribution or what takes my time mostly is a CSI implementation inside Kubernetes.
We're going to dig into that definitely in a little bit. Thanks for joining us. And then Matt.
Hey guys, Matt Rickard. I'm R2D4 on GitHub. I work at Google, and I've been working on Kubernetes since I joined Google in 2016. So I started out on the founding team of Minikube. That was kind of the first thing I worked on. And then I moved more into more Kubernetes developer experience things across kind of the whole ecosystem. And now I'm working a little out of tree on things like Knative and Kubeflow.
Cool. And same thing with you. I'm sure we'll hear about that in a little bit more in a second. So first question is a general question. One, what brings you to Kubernetes specifically? And two, is Kubernetes and its ecosystem projects the first open source project that you've contributed to upstream? And Michelle, why don't you go first? We'll do the same rotation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, When I joined Google, I did not really know anything about Kubernetes. I just knew it was sort of an up and coming project, and at least it sounded very exciting to me. And it's definitely my first open source project that I've worked on. And I have to say, I've been very happy with how amazing the community has been, and how like inviting and helpful everyone is, even when we work across companies and all of that.
And do you remember when you did your first PR?
Yeah, I think
was
my
it?
very first PR was it was in December 2016, I think, and it was to add some labels to every single storage E2E test.
I think that's a reoccurring theme in a lot of new contributors' lives here.
Yeah.
I think is adding labels. Vlad, what about you? Is this your first open source upstream project? And B, how did you get it? How did you get to Kubernetes or its ecosystem projects?
Sure. Back in the day when I started, I did a little bit of work in the Go client for Mesosphere, and that was my first taste of open source. And I think that probably was my first real Go code that landed on anything of substance. And then after that, I ended up at Dell doing open source advocacy. That's how I got kind of landed into doing or writing code for a volume provider or volume plugin for one of the products there. And that's how I got started, and that's what I've been, that's been my area since. As far as first PR, I think it was a massive PR that
I'm fact checking right now. I'm just kidding. I'm not really.
Yeah, it's been so long in Kubernetes time. I just remember a massive PR trying to get in, and it was like, nah, that's, the code review alone took too long, and we never got it in. So we went back to the drawing board and kind of learned from our mistakes, and from my mistake as well, because it was my first hands-on first. Hey, go work on this gigantic code and try to get it in. And it was a learning experience, but as Michelle said, the community, it always amazes me to see the machinery of the community working to get this massive amount of coding out every quarter. So I'm still amazed to see it working today.
Yeah, for sure. And you're also an author, right? I feel like you have a book.
I do. Actually, I have a couple. Back in my Java days, I worked on a book. And then more recently, I wrote, I think it was published in 2016 on Go, Introduction to Go.
Yeah, that's the one that I knew about. So I'm going to have to check out the others.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt, what about you? How did you, I feel like you came in through you obviously came in through Minikube, but did you have any other interactions with Kubernetes pre-Minikube? And if so, do you remember your first PR?
I didn't have any Kubernetes PRs. I had opened up a few issues in Docker, and I had tried to send a few PRs there, which failed pretty miserably. So I would say Kubernetes was probably my best open source experience getting started. But yeah, when I started at Google, I basically, like, the Minikube project just started kind of in tandem. So I just started working on that. And my first PR to Minikube was, I don't even know. I mean, probably like adding the like vendor folder or something like that, or the make file. And then my first upstream contribution was I fixed some issue with TPRs, where Minikube would just panic, which was a bit problematic because it had to do with like when the I don't know, I think something got registered, and then when Minikube shut down and turned back on, it just panicked. But yeah, it was a one-line fix.
All right. So Valerie in Slack chat says, how would you recommend contributors build the skills and experience to becoming an owner's file reviewer? So what are some tips that you could give Valerie on her path to becoming a reviewer, and maybe even what are some good reviewer attributes? Vlad, I see you coming off mute.
Sure. You have to start somewhere. So definitely, start small. Become make it a habit to review existing PRs. Be present in the community. It's all about relationship at the end of the day. So the more people see your reviews, the more you participate, the more likely folks who are leading different SIGs will recognize you and ask you to take on responsibility. And once you start volunteering, eventually you'll have some commits, and you'll most likely end up owning a section of the code, or your handle will appear on a section of a code that you've committed. So that's has been my experience.
To add to that, I think also a nice way to get familiar with a new component is to just take a look at those files and see if there's missing unit test coverage, and start adding unit tests for them. That can really help with like actually understanding the nitty gritty of what the code is actually trying to do. And who knows, you might even uncover bugs as you're writing tests. I always love that feeling when I write a new test and it finds a bug. And then once that gets you familiar with the component, you're potentially fixing bugs in it, and that gets attentions of the owners, and you start building a relationship there and credibility and all that.
Do you have some specific qualities for storage folks who are reviewing code? Or attributes or stuff that you look for?
I think many of us, before working on Kubernetes, did not have, other than using storage, did not develop for storage. It was more, my introduction to the code base had to do more with understanding what was going on as far as Go, being curious about Kubernetes itself. But I don't think there's any hard prerequisite to be a storage buff or somebody who's super knowledgeable about storage. It definitely helps, but I don't think it's a disqualifying attribute if you're not there as far as storage knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, I think with respect to storage, it also depends on which part of the storage code base you're looking at. So I would basically split up the storage code base into two parts. There's the general storage controllers, which sort of manage the lifecycle of the storage backends. And then there's the actual storage backend drivers themselves. So I think for the actual storage backends, those you might need to be a little more familiar and have experience or access to those storage systems. But that being said, that's only half of the story. The other half is we have all these generic controllers for managing the volume lifecycle that don't actually require super in-depth storage knowledge.
Matt, what about you with Minikube when you were growing reviewers? What were some things that you were looking for in folks as they were making more and more contributions?
I would say like one piece of advice for reviews is that like reviews always don't have to be reviews per se. Like don't be afraid to ask a question. Like, why is this being done? Like, why is this code this way? Like, you don't necessarily need like to know the right way. And sometimes, you know, I feel like the author will always respond with their kind of thinking behind it, and that can help you grow as a reviewer, as a coder, as whatever. But I mean, who knows? You might even uncover some assumption that was being made that didn't really make a lot of sense, or that the author hadn't thought through. So I would say like, don't be afraid to ask like a question. Like, I mean, stupid questions, whatever. There's none of them right. Really, just kind of getting familiar with the code. You know, reviewing teps. I mean, there's no, you know, no one says, hey, you can't review this, right? You know, so it's just like kind of get reviews out there, ask questions.
Very cool. What about approvers? Like when a reviewer comes to you and says, I think I'm ready to be an approver. How does that conversation usually go?
I would say in my experience, like if you can own like a clearly delineated piece of the project, that's a great candidate for an approver. Right? I mean, just kind of structurally, organizationally. So kind of carving out like a little section of the project, whether that be through a cap or, you know, through this area that you're really well known as, you're responding to all the issues, you're reviewing all the code. I think like, I mean, that's pretty much what I look for in an approver, or going from a reviewer to an approver.
So Vlad mentioned earlier that there were some challenges with his first PR. So knowing what you know now, would you go back and do anything differently, or would you tell new contributors to, like, would you tell new contributors a tip or some kind of piece of information that might help them along with their first PR?
I'm sorry, was that for me? My phone.
No, for everyone. So like, okay. Yeah, if you could do it all again, like what's something that you would tell your past self or a new contributor right now as far as parts of the challenging process?
I think about this quite a bit, and especially after my first PR did fail. And I think there are a few things you can do because, you know, participating in open source is mostly a social activity, and be vocal and in every sense of the word, you know, in GitHub, on Slack, even on Twitter, be vocal in a sense that if you don't know something, ask early and ask a lot, you know, because Kubernetes is such a massive code base. Just about everybody who's doing anything in Kubernetes, especially when you know, toward the end of the release cycle, you know, people get super busy. So you have to get their attention, you know, early. And I think part of the failures of some of the larger features that I've worked on had to do with not being vocal enough, and not being proactive, asking questions, not being afraid to ask questions, be willing to be wrong. So that, to me, you know, if I had to do things differently, I think that would have helped me. And you know, the working on Kubernetes, while there are documentations out there, there's a lot of documentation out there, but there's no tutorial on, you know, step 0, step 1, step 2, how to contribute to Kubernetes. So a lot of the things that you have to do to be successful in contributing has to do with a lot of discovery exercises, and that you have to do yourself. And it's super intimidating, and can be intimidating, but I found out, over the years that I've been doing this, people are always willing to help, especially on Slack. But you have to be willing to ask a question. You have to be willing to sound like you don't know what you're talking about. And people will, even if you do know what you're talking about, but you can't come in as, well, I know everything, which is completely impossible when it comes to Kubernetes. Even if you were some of the earlier code contributors, Kubernetes has grown to such a size that it's hard to know everything about everything in Kubernetes. So you're always asking questions, and you're always willing to learn and listen to others, and be willing to be wrong and be corrected.
Good advice. Matt, I think you had actually taken yourself off mute, or Michelle, was that you?
Oh, I think that was me. Yeah, to add to that, I would say, like as a new contributor, I think it's good to like start off small and slowly grow the contributions as you get more comfortable, and they start coding up everything. And then when it comes time to review, some of the reviewers end up, having a lot of like design discussions and stuff like that. And I think like before, spending a lot of time and energy going to implement something, I think communication is key. To communicate with like the leads of the SIGs in the areas where you're planning to do this work, just to like communicate your plan and communicate your design and get approval on the overall ideas first before you start spending a lot of time coding and then finding out that maybe the design is not the direction that people wanted to take things in.
I'm hearing an overly communicate theme here. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I would have to reiterate that so much. It pains me to see people spend so much time on features that are, I mean, they might work, they might be, actually well coded, but if they don't fit in with the design principles, the roadmap, the feature set and scope or whatever of the project, then it's gonna be a tough time to review it after it's already been done. And so that's one thing. I see it over and over again. People send huge PRs, seemingly pretty good features, but it hasn't been discussed yet, hasn't been reviewed, the design hasn't been reviewed. And I mean, I've seen a lot of PRs kind of sit and be closed because of that. So I would just say communicate, get people involved, obviously write a design, write a cap, talk in Slack, ask questions, all of that. So
I did get a DM from someone who is who's very new and wants to understand what owners' files are, and the reviewers and approvers. Just a little nugget too of data. The last time that we did a contributor experience survey, which was last, I think like October, 25% of the people said that they were new to open source. And this was based on our current contributor population that took the survey. It was like 170 people. So with that said, what's some advice here for like folks that are, also new to open source? Anybody have any new to open source advice?
Or were you asking specifically about owners' files?
Yes, and then like how owners' files work like within Kubernetes and kind of like why. I think they just want to know just a general kind of what owners' files are and how they play within this ecosystem.
Okay. I mean, so the basic premise of owners' files is to be able to kind of guide people to like who are the experts in that particular component, and that understand that component very well. So when, as a new contributor, if you are making a change in that area, the owners file can help you figure out who might be the best people to communicate your ideas with and, discuss your ideas with. I think it's mostly there from a code organization standpoint, since like the code base is so big. And like Vlad said earlier, there's no way that any one person is going to be able to understand all of the, every single component in Kubernetes. So those owner files just serve as a guideline as to who are the experts for that particular area and who you can talk to.
Good. Thanks, Michelle. Does anybody have any advice for new to open source folks for this project? That, you can see maybe like differences in cultural norms or anything along those lines?
I would say my advice is like make the actual code or documentation or whatever change very small, because there's so many other things that go into that first contribution, right? I mean, there's signing the CLA, understanding what the CLA is, maybe creating a GitHub account, figuring out what issues are, what PRs are. If you're used to kind of an internal version control system, even getting used to Git, what it means to send a PR. Git is really confusing. I have to say, as someone who's used it for a very long time and understands a lot about it, it's a lot of magic as well. But yeah, there's just so many other things that go into like actually getting that code merged that like keep the actual part of it kind of small.
Definitely. Well, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. If it's starting out as a new contributor to Kubernetes, there are a lot of different steps. Matter of fact, I was talking to somebody on Slack earlier about that, and it's a large code base. You would definitely have to select which section you're interested in, but then there are these technical preparations that you have to undertake. So Git has been mentioned. You definitely need to get your machine set up with Docker and all the other tools that are necessary to run Kubernetes locally or to build Kubernetes locally. Obviously, some knowledge of Go would help. One of the things I didn't do when I was starting out is spend a lot of time with the Get Started. I think it's the development.md. There's a development file somewhere under the community repo. I can't remember the path, but basically it outlines a lot of the steps that you need to get started on the technical front. The tools that you need, how to use Git to check out the code, create your own branch locally, et cetera, and rebase that against the master, get your, work on your code, and then what you need to do to check that back in and push that back in and create a PR out of it. So there are a lot of different knowledge that are different domain of knowledge that you need to get started, and that can be intimidating, but you will not be able, unless you've done this before and you've done it quite a bit, you will not be able to just, in a couple hours, get your Kubernetes development environment set up and you're rolling. It will probably take you more than a couple hours, a few hours, and getting it wrong at first. Go back to the documentation and figure out what's going on and get things working. So I think patience is the key operative word here, but it's definitely possible.
And are your SIGs or other ecosystem projects looking for either new or current contributors?
Sure.
Michelle, you got landed that one.
I think there's always a lot of work to do and we're always looking for help. So I think
any specific needs that you could call out, even for experienced contributors?
Oh yeah, there's tons of things to do. So at least for like CSI work, I keep a project board with a list of all the tasks and stuff that we plan or that we want to do for the next release. And we have a bunch of stuff that's unassigned and are looking for owners, both new and experienced. So if you're interested in helping out with the CSI work, reach out to me on Slack and we can figure out based off of your current experience, like what would be some good tasks to get started with.
Awesome. Matt, what about you? I'm sure Kubeflow and some other projects you're working on are looking for new contributors or experienced contributors, right?
Yeah, I would say every project I work on is looking for new contributors of any experience level. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many opportunities to contribute. I mean, whether it's through documentation, whether it's just like, making a small bug fix, adding a feature. I mean, obviously, good first issue is always a great label to look at across kind of all of these repositories. There's kind of a special GitHub one because it actually shows up in your feed if you're following a project or following someone when you tag it. And I know a lot of repositories use that. Minikube, I think we published a roadmap not too long ago of, sorry, I might be getting kicked out, but I thought I had this room for an hour.
Yes, in true Google spirit right here. This is it. I just got kicked out of my room, y'all. So bear with Matt as he figures out. You have the project that you actually wish that you had time to help out more on, but unfortunately you just don't have the cycles to do it.
I think even in storage, I wish I had time to, as Michelle said earlier, there are different segments of storage. There's the internal controllers, and then there's the plugins. So the internal stuff, which they don't get touched too often because they impact so much. So it's stable code that, but I wish I had time to learn more and participate more in that section, which I'm going to try to, but definitely it's an area of interest in the internal controllers.
Michelle, what about you? Oh, you're on mute still.
You're on mute, Michelle.
Sorry. At least one area that I wish I had more time to spend on is around the test infrastructure and release automation. I think it's an area that like a lot of projects don't really invest like as many resources as we may actually need. I think Kubernetes has been pretty good in that regard, in that we have our SIG testing group, which is super phenomenal. But they're definitely like, there's so much work that could be done, and they definitely need a lot of, there's a lot of things that they could use help with, I think.
Yeah, theme of this call is also create more tests. And
it's not just creating more tests, but also like making tests easier to run for like the rest of the Kubernetes ecosystem, I think.
Fair.
Right now, the current test infrastructure has been customized very specifically to Kubernetes. And now as the Kubernetes core is starting to push out a lot of the not so core modules out of the main Kubernetes tree, we have this next set of problems where like now all of these out of tree subprojects have to figure out their own testing infrastructure again. So I definitely think like I think there is actually a working group for like test infra now. Mm-hmm. And they are focused on that problem of how other projects in the Kubernetes ecosystem that aren't actually Kubernetes can take advantage of all the work that they've been doing.
Yes, and shouts to that team help out with.
It's somewhat related to SIG testing. Minikube. So Minikube was designed, I don't know, back in 2016, kind of based off of Docker Machine, if anyone was familiar with that, but kind of for Kubernetes. And now we're in a place where running Kubernetes containerized is more feasible than it was before. So running the kubelet inside Docker, obviously running all of the other components inside Docker as well. And so we've seen that with projects like Kind. I believe it's under SIG's testing, but using kind of taking either working on Kind or incorporating some of the Kind features in Minikube, I think would be a great place for collaboration. And whether that's on the more testing side of how do we actually test the Kubernetes-based projects in CI without having to spin up a cluster or reusing kind of existing containerized infrastructure, or from the development side where I'm on a Linux laptop and I want to spin up a multi-node Kubernetes cluster in Docker, right? So I think there's opportunities for working on that in both Minikube and Kind. And I think that's a really exciting place to be right now.
Yes, and Kind is definitely picking up contributors there as well. So that's really cool. All right. So let's move on to a question that was asked several weeks ago, actually, because sometimes we get code base tour requests, and we have one today. Vlad's going to do CSI code base tour, which is super awesome. Vlad, do you want to take it away? Share your screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
I will do that.
And while you do that, if folks are out there and want a code-based tour of anything special, or if you want dependencies explained, or if you're ruffling through the code and say this whole entire section is just a mishmash, I have no idea what I'm looking at, this is the place for you. We've done Kubernetes here as well. We're going to do Kube Builder next month. We'll also have a scheduler next month. So we're going to pick apart some of this together.
All right, me completely forgot about that part of the. All right,
we're just so into the questions and answers.
I was.
This is way easier than I thought.
Can you see my screen?
You're good to go here. And looks good on YouTube, according to Jeff in chat.
Okay, so I don't need to. I'll bump it up just in case. So as we were saying, we'll focus on CSI as far as storage, and there are multiple levels to the code base when it comes to storage. CSI in particular has two main portions. There is the internal kubelet controllers and what I call a CSI adapter internally, and then we have the external component. So we'll look at both real quick. So I am at the Kubernetes, and I've already clicked on PKG. And if you scroll all the way down, you'll see volume. And by the way, there are other portion of this that we're not gonna look at, which is the kind of the internals that drive all this. But we don't need to go that far up or that far down the abstraction chain. So inside here, you can see all the internal drivers, and this is the way we used to do storage maybe about a year or so ago. And basically the way we did storage is every storage vendor would come in and try to get their own Go packages inside that particular directory and work at it and write code against the internal volume API. Well, that works great, but there are two things that was against it. One is that you were working against Kubernetes, so you had to have the stringent code reviews, and you were pegged to the release cycle of Kubernetes. And the other thing that was a strike against this is the fact that it was growing the code base. And if there was a build failure or here, it could take down the entire building structure for the code. So then we did CSI. CSI itself is like I was saying, is an internal driver that uses the underlying volume mechanism that's inside Kubernetes. And what that allowed us to do is to leverage the existing constructs that are built inside Kubernetes for storage, such as PVs and PVCs, etc. Now, inside CSI, this is all of and it has grown since we started maybe about a year and a half ago. And we see all of the different Go files that makes CSI works. And each one of these files and their accompanying tests basically implements a portion of the internal volume API. For instance, we have a CSI plugin, which implements the plugin a portion of the API. We have Mounter, which implements the mounting portion of the API. We have an attacher, which basically does, as the name suggests, it implements the attacher portion of the API. Now, this portion of the code, when it runs internally, will, at a high level, intercept API requests that comes in for volume operations. And once it intercepts these calls, it delegates that call to the external components of CSI. And part of the CSI contract is so that vendors have to write code against a gRPC interface. And when you create your driver and you implement your driver against that interface, Kubernetes will automatically know how to talk to your driver using that gRPC interface. So that's a super high level, like 50,000 foot view of what's going on. So let's look at the external components. We'll look at let's see. This is the Kubernetes-CSI repository, and this is where we keep all of the consequential external components that make up that allows us that allow a driver author to participate and to deploy a CSI driver. You'll see that we have several external dash components, and these are sidecar components that a driver author would deploy along with their driver to add functionality. For instance, if you're deploying a driver that supports snapshot, you would make use of this sidecar. If you do an external attachment, you would use this sidecar. We have the docs. This is very recent. We have a resizer, which allows you to do in-place resizing of your volumes. And then we have an external provisioner, which is another sidecar that will allow you to create your volume as needed. There's also in here, there's also some what we call, they're like demo drivers, and they're fully functional drivers, not recommended for production, but gives you an idea of how some of the drivers work, and how if you were interested in creating your own CSI driver, it gives you a starting point. So one driver that we use a lot of is the CSI host path driver. and it is an implementation of the existing host path driver that we have inside Kubernetes, but this one is a CSI specific one. And it, like I said, it's a functional driver. It has all the different constructs that you need to create a fully functional driver. So a lot of people, when they're starting out creating their own CSI driver, they come here and look to see how this works. And then there are other, actually this has grown since the last time I looked at it. And we could see additional drivers and other components that are part of the external CSI repo. And then we also have the documentation section, and this is the Kubernetes-CSI doc. We saw that repo inside the Kubernetes repo, and the doc actually this is a great area for anybody who's interested and want to start contributing. With juggling writing code and writing documents, a lot of us do the best we can, but documentation usually suffered. But again, this is certainly an area we can use more hands to keep it updated. But there was a big effort done toward the end of last year and earlier this year to bring a lot of the documents up to speed. So I think it's in a better shape now, but definitely can use additional help. Was there anything else you wanted to see, Paris? Or
I think this was great.
Okay.
Michelle, are there any about the code base like that you want to call out as far as like crazy dependencies or like things that people don't realize that like only the owners know that you've encountered?
Yeah, so if you go back to the Kubernetes CSI GitHub page, 2 over to the left.
2 over to the left. This guy?
Yeah. And you scroll up to the top again, towards the top. You'll see, I just wanted to point out here on some of these repositories, you'll see, X issues needs help. So if you're a new contributor and you're interested in getting started out, you can take a look at these repositories where we have the help wanted tags on there.
Oh, is it?
Or here, so at the bottom where it says go and the number of stars.
Oh, okay.
There's here it says 1 issue needs help.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, this guy. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. There you go. Try to make it as easy as possible.
That's good. That's really good. Sweet. No, this was great. And let me make sure that I've answered all of the questions in chat. Hold on one sec, don't move. I've answered everything in my direct messages, and it looks like we've answered everything in Slack. Let me go to Twitter. In the meantime, do y'all have any questions for each other? Anything you've always wanted to ask a Minikube maintainer? Anything you've always wanted to ask storage professionals? Speak now or forever hold your peace, panelists. All right. Well, I feel like y'all know where each other, you know where each other lives. So if you had something, you'd ask directly. But that's it for today. We have officially wrapped up 2 episodes of Meet Our Contributors. I feel like we've already had hundreds watch. So this is amazing. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, of course, to our panelists for taking the time out to help mentor folks in the community. This is such a benefit. It will live on YouTube forever, and our information will be stale in 3 days. So thanks again. I really appreciate y'all. It's been a blast. All right.